It's a parade of cold fronts marching across the United States, and that's what we'll be dealing with as one moves tonight and another one comes late this week. And if everything goes according to plan, it might lead to another nice low humidity weekend. All that and so much more on tonight's Joe and Joe Weather Show. There's Joe Rayo on the left. I'm Joe Chaffee. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mr. Rayo.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay. I guess you're not. You're really just now lately you've been just getting on the show in not so good moods. So I'm thinking you must have had to clean up all that fireworks stuff from yesterday.
No, we're doing cleanup, but it wasn't necessarily fireworks stuff. But that's neither here nor there.
Okay. Well,
I'm not getting into it. So,
no, well, clearly you
um,
shouldn't. So anyway, we have a now we have this weather front that's coming through tonight. Neither of us were really excited over the prospects for severe weather today, and that certainly played out. Even SPC wound up pulling the risk areas further south and west, where there were probably a little bit more, uh, let's say, deserved in those areas across parts of Maryland and Virginia and points south. But for eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, it really wasn't much of anything at all that moved through during the late afternoon and evening hours.
about the only place that really has any action is just north of the center of the country, where they've had a moderate risk on the Storm Prediction Center convective outlook for portions of South Dakota, Minnesota, and also for northwestern Iowa. And that is apparently where all of the big boomer activity is presumed to be taking place. But for us, you're right. The activity. I mean, we had with the stone's throw yesterday, just to the west, a marginal risk of severe weather. And as you just pointed out, Joe, that has been pushed or nudged south of here. And in fact, even Pennsylvania. Yesterday, they had a broad area of slight risk, and that too got cut down. So it really was not much of a day out there in terms of nasty or potentially nasty weather here in the northeastern United States.
I got the up and down East Coast Atlantic satellite loop up here, and there's an east-west kind of I don't know if I necessarily want to call it Boeing, but it's got an arc to it of some strong thunderstorms. You're seeing a lot of these lightning strikes moving out of Virginia and into western North Carolina. There's some cells in eastern Tennessee, and not too far by me either. Another day where we just did not get a drop of anything as far as rain is concerned. I mean, I heard thunder on and off from time to time today, but it was all around me, and you can kind of see there on the lower right where Georgia see some flashes that sort of come and go. This line moving southward, if it holds together, maybe I'll get it to something a little later on this evening or before midnight, which would be nice. But meanwhile, to the north, you just got these clouds that are sort of moving eastward. The precip is played out according to plan. In fact, it's mostly done. There's really not a whole lot here. There's some rain in upstate New York, and there's rain over Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and still a little bit of light rain left in parts of Long Island, and a few light showers back in New Jersey. But you can see where all the thunderstorms are and where all the warnings are. We've got a slew, one, two, three, looks like five severe thunderstorm warnings right now up across North Carolina as that area moves southward. The radar gets more speckled looking as you head down into South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Another cluster that's moving westward, southern Mississippi and southeastern Louisiana. And there's some rather strong storms tonight coming out of where that moderate risk is, where we've got a bunch of severe thunderstorm warnings now up in parts of northwestern Iowa and southwestern Minnesota. There's like an arm of storms on the radar that extends from there to just north of Chicago, and we're seeing a few severe thunderstorm warnings in that batch. So not too shabby looking on the radar here, up in the upper Midwest.
Well, if you follow the 588 height line on the 500, and this I'm referring to the GFS here, you will see that the activity, the activity for potential severe weather would run from southeastern South Dakota across the northern portion of Iowa through extreme, right through the Illinois Wisconsin border, which is why it's so close to the Chicago area. And then it heads almost straight southeast. And if you could continue to follow this route, it would go cutting across southwestern Pennsylvania and then off the mid-Atlantic coastline. So that pretty much spells that we're in pretty good shape up here in the northeastern United States, here in the tri-state area. It does not look like much of anything to threaten our region for the next couple of days. We'll be in basically a dry, fair airflow with northwest winds, and yeah, looks like tomorrow's going to be a pretty nice day out there.
Yeah, the Storm Prediction Center. This was sort of a late ad today where they put that moderate risk up in eastern South Dakota, northwestern Iowa, southwestern Minnesota. Uh, they they really scaled back. The slight risk and the marginal risk in Pennsylvania to New Jersey's all gone now, so you've still got a marginal risk showing up down in Virginia and North Carolina. So I suspect that the northeastern part of this is also pretty much a done deal. So you got the marginal risk across North Carolina, northern South Carolina, and that goes into that slight risk that runs through the upper Midwest, including Chicago, northern Illinois, into most of Indiana, enhanced to moderate risk northern Iowa, northeastern Nebraska, southeastern South Dakota, southwestern Minnesota, and then it goes on from there to a slight risk all the way up into northern Montana. The tornado risk, though, is small here. It's just a small 2% area in that enhanced to moderate zone. It's really more about wind and hail at this point. The hatched area is a probability of 10% or greater of at least 65 knot wind gusts. And that covers much of the enhanced and moderate risk. In fact, there's a 40% chance of 50 knots or higher showing up where they've got the moderate risk. And in the hail area, the hail zone, it's a small area of hail is being indicated, not a whole lot of it, a small area of hail of 15%, and also 15% back into Montana. It is a hatched area, so that means it's a 10% or greater probability of 2-inch diameter hail or larger within 25 miles of any point. I don't even know what 2-inch diameter hail looks like. I've never seen that. Got to be somewhere between a golf ball and a tennis ball, I would imagine.
Well, tennis balls and baseballs are about 2.8 inches in diameter, and golf balls. Yeah, you're right. Probably somewhere between a golf ball and a tennis ball in terms of size. And I'm sure if it were to clunk you on the head, that would hurt.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Rainfall from WPC. Really going to town with rain in the Appalachians, West Virginia, Western Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Southern Ohio, Eastern Indiana, on the order of 3 to 5 inches in some places over the next 7 days. And also from Southeast Virginia into South Carolina, up and down the coast, and actually extending fairly far inland, showing 3 to as much as, excuse me, 5 inches of rain over the next 7 days. Much of the Northeast is between a half an inch and, let's say, an inch to an inch and a quarter across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, into southern New England. A little bit higher, showing up in northern Maine and over in New Brunswick. Uh, Down into the Gulf Coast, it's mostly a half inch to an inch tops. No hardly any rain through most of Texas. Fairly dry in Oklahoma, dry in California, Nevada. Still getting a little bit of monsoon action going up into eastern Arizona, New Mexico, and up into Colorado. Northern Plains showing some, and the western lakes, the northwestern lakes, in this zone of about, say, anywhere from a half an inch to as much as an inch and a half. It's been raining quite a bit uh, since the spring in the northern plains, and that just continues. With that Canada pattern just being very busy, it's no surprise with all these short waves that keep coming up and down. So I didn't even look at the GFS yet today, believe it or not. I did look at the European And I'm kind of going with the idea of the European. This front's going through. We're seeing it move out. Now, the next couple of days, it's a little tricky, if only because of the fact that we've got this onshore flow, the high going by to our north. I mean, it should be dry enough that the weather will be okay, but the wind coming in off the ocean is probably going to hold the temperatures back just a little bit. We'll still get into the 80s. It'll probably be in the 70s along the shore, but not too shabby. The rain's getting confined more down into Virginia, North Carolina, near where the frontal boundary is. And then, of course, what happens, Joe, is that that front comes back up as a warm front sometime Thursday night. We've got another cold front coming in on Friday. Maybe that one triggers off a more robust round of showers and thunderstorms. And then it looks like there's another big high that's coming down for Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. I kind of like the Europeans' idea of bringing down another, cool high pretty far south into the northeast, which will make for another nice, low humidity, sunny type of weekend from what I'm looking at.
It does. It does. And in fact, the high that is building in is rather large and rather extensive, and something that is atypical for the month of July. And it will take its sweet time. I mean, sometimes you have these, bubbles of fair weather from Canada in the summertime. They move in and very quick. They bring you about a day or so of relief, but then just as quickly they move on by, and back you go into the increasing flow of humid air. But this looks like it's going to be with us not just for and Saturday. Again, it looks like a day of improvement. Whatever we have in terms of cloud cover early Saturday should gradually give way more and more to sunshine, drier air, blue skies, lower humidity. And once that builds in and becomes established, it's going to be here not just for Saturday, but also for Sunday, and also probably
Monday.
for the start of next week on Monday as well,
Yeah, I'm just
and
looking.
maybe Tuesday.
Well, I'm just looking at the new GFS, which is now gone. It's got more of the Europeans' idea of a much robust, stronger high building down. I think that makes sense when you look at what's going on in the overall pattern. You just bring up the upper air here. It uh, I'm trying to think back. Trying to remember a summer, and I guess I just can't remember seeing Canada being as active as it is. I mean, when was the last time that you saw a deep upper low in southern James Bay? This was on Saturday, by the way. Uh, you just don't usually see upper lows this deep, and when you see where that darker blue color there, it's telling you that those heights are well below normal. Well, the upper low pulls out, and another upper low and trough starts to drop into the eastern states for Friday for the weekend, and you can see that the westerlies here. I mean, it's not unusual for the upper air westerlies to be, south into the say the Carolinas, but you've got the southern edge of the westerlies almost all the way down to the Florida Georgia border. I mean, that's pretty far south when you think about it. And there's no real sign to me. You've got higher than normal pressures across Greenland and into northwestern Canada. That remains. So as long as that's the case, you've got everything displaced too far south. The upper low in the Gulf of Alaska is there. You've got this upper low near northwestern parts of Newfoundland by the time we get to Sunday. And that just continues to leave us in a lovely northwest flow. And then here comes the next trough and shortwave next week, which continues that trophy look in the eastern United States. And I'm just driving the GFS right through the long range. Say, well, the upper it starts to lift out a little bit toward the end of the forecast period, but I'm just going to go back to the whole notion of the trend being your friend, and a lot of times the models like to do that on their runs where they, somewhere between 300 and 384 hours, it tries to show you that the pattern changes a little bit. So I would be very suspect of seeing something like that come to fruition unless we begin to see it show up, let's say, at least inside the 10-day time frame. Right now, I'm just going to kind of go with the flow here, which is pretty much wash, rinse, repeat until further notice.
Well, I think it was in 2016 that particular summer, I refer to it as the Garden of Eden summer because we had lots of breakouts from Canada, lots of northwesterly airflow, which brought us dry and pleasant readings. Very few spells of heat and humidity, at least in the northeastern part of the country. So this kind of reminds me of that year, and we don't really see in the foreseeable future, at least I don't, next 1 to 2 weeks, any kind of extreme heat and humidity that's going to be visiting our neck of the woods. Again, every once in a while, the humidity will go up a bit, and we may get temperatures well into the 80s to near 90. But um, it's not like some of the other summers that I could remember in my past. At least some of the Julys I remember where we've had day in and day out of heat and humidity, and you're just sitting there and looking and yearning for some kind of a cool front to come down from Canada and break the spell of heat. It's nothing like that. This is not anything like that. This is, again, very much contrary to what you would normally expect in the month of in July.
Oh, and you know what? Whatever heat ridge there is just sort of stretched out in east-west fashion across the southern third of the U.S. Yeah, every once in a while it strengthens a bit and pops up back up into the plains and up into the Midwest. Uh, but that's it. I mean, here you go at the end of this week, just to give you an idea. I mean, here's what I'm talking about. It's you got this upper high that's sitting in the southeast on Wednesday, and by the time we get to the end of the week, that upper high actually migrates westward to New Mexico, West Texas, because another trough is dropping into the eastern part of the United States. It's and then after that starts to flatten out again. It actually shifts even further west to Utah, Arizona, and Nevada because yet another trough is dropping into the eastern part of the United States. I, the the ridging is just not there. Uh, how are you going to build a ridge into the eastern part of the United States if you keep getting these deep troughs that get basically being put on an express train into the Great Lakes and Northeast, one after another, and the overall flavor of the upper pattern. By the way, I was looking at the teleconnections today, pretty much like yesterday. This sort of zigzaggy pattern on the PNA, the Pacific North America Index, is telling you that you're getting these fast pressure changes going from ridge to in the west and in the east, going from ridge to trough, ridge to trough, ridge to trough in the western part of the United States. Of course, in the east, it would be the exact opposite. You'll go from trough to weak ridge, trough to weak ridge, trough to weak ridge. And then the NAO, Joe, is just slightly negative, and it's neutral to slightly negative for the next 16 days. And if you go back since the middle of June, that's pretty much been it's almost flatlining. It's if this were a map, if this were a chart of heartbeats, okay, you've really kind of you're going almost flatlining. The heartbeat is getting weaker and weaker, and the line is getting flatter and flatter as we go from June 15th to July, whatever that last day is beyond the 15th. So let's say it's around the 17th or 18th. There's nothing here that says, guess what, we're going to something different.
And as far as the tropics are concerned, I think that's our next move here. Aside from Bonnie, Bonnie is really going to town out in the Pacific Ocean. I mean, she didn't really do all that much in the Atlantic Basin, but boy, once she crossed over and went into the Pacific, she has turned into a real nasty system. And aside from Bonnie, it's really not much to talk about in terms of tropical activity, which is also kind of, well, I mean, it's not strange. I mean, we've said many times that July is sometimes a slack month in terms of Atlantic tropical activity. And this year, it's more than slack, it's just downright blech.
Well, we've had three tropical storms. Well, two. Let's call it two, and then an asterisk on the third one. Bonnie on the Pacific tropics. I brought up the entire Pacific tropics, so Bonnie's kind of on the edge of this picture on the right. And you could see it. I haven't really been looking here, Joe, but I'm assuming it's a hurricane because it sure looks like one on the loop here. But it's offshore. It's moving westward. So it's not going to really be impacting anybody. It's kind of, in a way, it would sort of be nice if it moved up north of 20 degrees north and stayed, say, inside 115 or 120 west, so that that moisture would get up into the southwest and into California. But that's not going to happen, especially with a ridge that's going to be actually to the north, that's actually going to be migrating toward the west coast. So that'll keep that from happening.
Yeah, it is a hurricane. It has maximum sustained winds as of the last observation as of 4 o'clock Central Time, 5 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. 100 knots, 115 mile per hour sustained winds. The minimum pressure is down to 964. It's located at 15.5 north, 105.7 west, and it is moving to the west northwest at a pretty good clip, 13 knots, 15 miles per hour. So he has certainly evolved into a rather significant storm as opposed to when it was languishing over in the Atlantic basin, as I said. But once she crossed over and moved into the Pacific, uh, away she went, so to speak, and
Yeah.
nothing really to talk about in the Atlantic. The
No,
Atlantic is
I got the loop up now. I mean, there's a tropical wave that just moved off south of the Cape Verde Islands. It's elongated, stretched out north south. It doesn't really look like much. There is what I consider to be a fair amount of African dust from the Sahara that's to the north of that, that's moving westward as well. So it's kind of a dusty mess out there. So while that's happening, and then the state of the upper air across the lower U.S. and out in the Atlantic and in the Gulf of Mexico is such that it's really not favorable. You got too much shear going on. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing, all sorts of westerly winds across the eastern Caribbean coming off of South America. There's also a lot of shear northeast of Puerto Rico with it looks like an upper low that's out there, and there's some kind of wave in the Western Caribbean that's moved over the Yucatan, but doesn't look like much is going to come of that. So yeah, for now, yeah, July is usually, at least the first 3 weeks of July, most of the time, not much happens in the tropics, and I think that's what we're going to see here. Not much really happening in the tropics in the foreseeable future. Let's put it like that. In the foreseeable future.
foreseeable
Yes.
because we can't foresee very much more than, let's say, a couple of weeks, or try to see much more beyond a couple of weeks. And after that, it's not really foreseeable. It's more like an educated guess.
Yeah. Exactly. So, it's kind of tough. There's not a whole lot of weather going on, folks. It's just that way. I mean, it's very frustrating to us because Joe and I usually don't have a problem carrying a show for an hour or more when there's weather going on, but this is like pulling teeth here lately with what we have happening. So I would just like to ask you, Mr. Rayo, did you get to see your episode of Perry Mason today?
I did catch bits and pieces of it. Unfortunately, right in the middle, um, technology again, Joe. Technology. The
Ah,
the screen went blank. The screen went blank, and both the executive producer and her brother, who was here, went into the room and looked at the TV. And apparently, I had touched one of those. You know how you change the on the menu, you can change the screen.
yeah.
It goes from like TWC one to TWC two or three or whatever like that. And with me, I must have pushed a button. Something must have happened. The screen went blank, and I just got fed up at that point. But I did catch bits and pieces. I saw that Judy Tyler did plant a very seductive kiss on Raymond Burr or Perry Mason's face within the first 15 minutes of the show. So um, yeah, I didn't catch. Unfortunately, I did not catch the entire program, but better luck next time.
Now, I don't know if I'm trying to see if they've moved to my Google Drive yet, and of course they haven't. So, um, help the cause. But all right, I didn't expect to do this, but I don't know if you've seen the. Hang on a second.
By the way, on MeTV on Sunday nights between 8 and 10 o'clock, they are now running the Perry Mason movies. You
Oh
may remember
yes,
that NBC had called William Burr up and said, "Hey, how would you like to reenact Perry Mason again?" And it's the 1980s. Paul Drake, the actor William Hopper, had passed away in 1970. So they got this young kid who is Paul Drake Jr., but Barbara Hale was still there. Perry or William Burr was Raymond Burr was still there. So if you want to see Perry Mason in living color, you can watch, and 2 hours worth. You can watch on MeTV on Sunday night between 8 and 10.
But apparently, I didn't realize that I knew, and I've seen some of them, but I didn't realize there were 30 of them that they made. 30
Right. Well,
movies.
actually, there were about 26 or 27 with Raymond Burr, but then he died, and then they continued with Perry Mason, even though Perry was no longer there. I don't know if they said he went on vacation or they make up something for his absence. But there actually were, 2 or 3 more episodes with somebody else playing the role of the defense attorney. So
Ah, right.
ah,
Just like in the
and you remember, of course, this is right after Perry. Perry made a magnificent. Raymond Burr made a magnificent transition. He went from Perry Mason in black and white to Ironside.
right.
Then when Ironside was done, he went back to Perry Mason. He
Yeah,
got out of the wheelchair and went back to Perry Mason.
yeah. Leon Probitsky hitting super chat tonight. Thanks, Leon. Most appreciated. The other thing was, I don't know if you saw it, but I've been putting up. I've become fascinated. I just finished the last episode of the first season, so I'm right after we're done. I'm gonna start watching season 2. I've become fascinated with the hats that some of these women are wearing on the show, and I've been posting my opinions on such hats. Like one was looked like a either was a frisbee, a giant frisbee, or a 33 and a third long playing record album as a hat. Uh, then there was another woman whose hat looked like either she was wearing a flying saucer or the top of a garbage pail, the lid of a garbage pail on the top of her head. So it's it's it, it's interesting, and some of them, it's very interesting because it's staged. If I were the actress, I would love to be the one in the ridiculous hat because when you're watching the show, that's who you remember. When they take these wide shots or even on the tight shots,
Right.
you remember the character wearing this, which was supposed to be considered high fashion in the 50s, along with the steel pointed breasts. Um, but you remember the character that's wearing the hat. However silly that hat may look to you now, it didn't look silly to those people then.
If you read there's a comic strip, Curtis, which is a story about a young African American boy and his young brother Barry and their parents. And whenever they do the Sunday Curtis, the Sunday comic strip, they're sometimes in church and they make commentary about the women coming into the church wearing crazy hats, just like you were making the commentary just now on the old Perry Mason shows, because some of these hats in the comic strip look very much like what you described. One of them may have actually looked like she was wearing a garbage pail on her head.
Right.
But that supposedly was fashion or is fashion when you go to some churches, I guess. And
All right. Oh,
there's
absolutely.
Curtis. There's Curtis and Barry sitting in the pew quietly and laughing because they're making commentary about each woman that's coming into the church and wearing these crazy, flowered hats and flat hats and big hat. It's very very funny.
Yeah, that's kind of like go up to Saratoga during a racing season up there, and you see lots of interesting hats being displayed because that's Saratoga's known. Part of the part of it is you have to wear a really ridiculous looking hat if you're a woman and you go to Saratoga. Even if, listen, if you're a guy, you got to wear a ridiculous looking hat as well. So, all right, you know what? Let's wrap it up. We'll call it a night, and we'll be back, I guess, tomorrow night at 7:30 Eastern time to see if we could uh, put 5 pounds of bologna into a 1 pound bag because because that's what it feels like right now in terms of what's going on weather-wise.
Or maybe it should be the other way: 1 pound of bologna in a 5 pound bag. We have we have a big bag, but we just don't have enough bologna.
Right, exactly. Bobby Whitaker just says, I just watched the case of the case of the sleepwalker's niece. Excellent episode. I'm not sure what season that's in. It's certainly not in season one, but I'll get to it eventually as I move along. It uh, there's some interesting, there's some interesting case. You have to give yourself a little bit of latitude. I mean, you can't really watch it and say, well, that's not right and that's not legal and it really doesn't work like that in the court, in a court of law. Well, you just kind of have to suspend reality a little bit and let. It's all about Perry solving the crime, and Della, uh, or Paul saying something that ultimately, triggers a light bulb moment in Perry's mind, and he figures out who the killer is. But I'm glad you're enjoying the show. By the way, I'm watching it on Freevee, which if you have Amazon Prime, you can access the show and probably other TV shows that you may like on Freevee. Which there are some commercials, but there are not a lot of them. They're very few. Most of them are 15-second commercial breaks, and there are very few of them. I got to think, Joe, as I'm watching the show, because in those days, the commercial breaks were short, and over the years, a lot of those shows were cut down, so you miss whole scenes because they added all this extra commercial time.
Right,
I think I'm pretty
right.
much, I think I'm pretty much seeing the shows intact from beginning to end. I'm not noticing anything edited out at all.
Well, I do notice on Perry Mason that they have sped it up. You can actually see, and not just Perry Mason, but other shows as well, like the Honeymooners, for example, and they have cut stuff out of that. The other night they showed the episode where it was the costume party, and Ralph wanted to get a rented costume, and he couldn't, so he made his costume, and supposedly he was the man from space, although at the end they thought he was a pinball machine.
Right.
And Norton got dressed up as Pierre Francois
The
Delibriowski and
plumes.
Le Plume, and he had a box of snuff where he would take the snuff and shove it up his nostril or whatever, and it would make him sneeze. And so there was a point on Sunday night where he kicked Norton out. The box of snuff was still there, but instead, and Ralph, what Ralph does is he takes the snuff for himself and tries it, and after a few moments, he sneezes as well. A very funny thing, and they cut that out.
Yeah.
They morphed out of that and morphed right into the next scene, and I was very, as
That's
a
I hate I
Honeymooners
hate
fan, I
I
was
hate
very
when they do that.
proud.
Bobby Whitaker's right. I do remember it now. That is actually season 1, episode 2. Was the case of the sleepwalker's niece, and I remember now what the episode was about. That actually was a very good episode. And there were 2 episodes where Whitney Blake was in the very first episode, and toward the end of the first season, she was also in another episode. I guess right before she went to be Missy on Hazel. So,
Right.
but it was nice to know that she was able to get work before she got into becoming a regular on a series.
Whitney Blake, after Hazel was canceled, Whitney Blake made an appearance on the Andy Griffith Show, playing the role, I believe, of a female lawyer who was very unusual back in the late '60s. And for whatever reason, Andy was alone with her at her house. Helen, Helen Crump, of course, was Andy's girlfriend back home in Mayberry. And there was one scene I remember. It's still tattooed in my head, where Whitney Blake comes out. They're at right next to a swimming pool, and Whitney Blake comes out in a white one-piece swimsuit. And like I said, I still remember that scene very, very well. And Andy Griffith, I'm sure if he was still alive, if you remember that, you could see his eyes like, wow, like. So Whitney Blake was a pretty good, very attractive woman,
Yes.
and she was also the mother of Meredith Baxter, another very attractive woman who was on Family Ties. So
She
it ran in the
also
family,
she
Joe.
also created and produced the show One Day at a Time.
Really,
Yes.
she was one of the producers of that one? I did not
Well,
know that.
she was the creator of the show, from what I understand. And she might have been
Oh,
as an
okay,
executive producer early on, but I don't know for sure. But
okay.
definitely the creator part. All right, let's wrap. Everybody, we'll see you tomorrow, 7:30 Eastern. Good night, everybody.
Nighty night.